Do not make me regret making this video. I do not want to see aggro decks popping up all over the place, but honestly, Ruby Amethyst showing once again why it is the best ink combination in the game, because it has, in my opinion, claimed the top spot as the best version of aggro you can now play in Lorcana. And just to show you this mirror match between aggro decks, I mean, Amber Amethyst has kind of been established as the hyper aggro deck of the format. It won a big tournament, and it is a good deck because you get things like Cinderella if you want to play it, the Simba bodyguard to protect your weenie questers, LeFou as a 2-quester for 2 as well, and even the Stitch package if you want a small draw engine. However, when you look at how you are expected to play that deck in order to win, it is a bit of tempo disruption with the Mim cards bouncing back your questers as well. I mean, the Simba protects them, the Mim card can also bounce them to protect them, but you lose tempo if you're not able to cast them, recast them fast enough. And again, aggro tries to win very early because once the game gets to mid and or late game, it's very hard for aggro to close it out. Now, when you look at what the Ruby package offers, it offers you the ability to play LeFou and Fan the Flames, which simply just ready up your low questers. And being early on in the game, your opponent likely won't have all of the removal needed, the non-challenging removal, in order to deal with those threats. Steel obviously can deal with it to a certain extent, but even against Steel decks, I have pulled out wins because you are able to even play more resilient cards in this version compared to the Amber Amethyst version. And by that, I mean things like the Mini Surfer and the Pongo, which don't require you to try to keep them safe, needing a combo piece like a Mim card to bounce them back once they're exerted, or a Simba bodyguard to protect them, because they're evasive. And it's very hard, or at least right now in the meta, it's very hard for the opponent to out evasives unless they're playing them themselves, or again, have that non-challenging sources of removal. So when you put this package together, you have Pinocchios and Maleficents that are readying themselves back up with LeFous and or Fan the Flames, meaning you don't lose tempo of bouncing them back to hand, although you still have that option just like you do with the Amber Amethyst version, but you also gain the added effect of in the mid, I guess you can call this mid-game turns 3 and 4, where you are able to put out these evasive characters and just continue to put even more pressure on the opponent, which is very hard to answer unless they have their own evasives or, like I said, non-challenging forms of removal, which again, they probably have to try to waste on like Pinocchios that are being readied back up. And so in this scenario, you can see the opponent's aggro deck just couldn't keep pace. Again, to be fair, I did go first, and it's very hard in the aggro mirror to win going second. But again, that's where this deck can also be a little bit more resilient because you play Teeth and Ambitions, which combo very well with the overstatted Mim cards. You can put 2 damage on a Mim Snake or a Mim Fox, it will survive and then continue to trade up into something. And so as usual with Ruby Amethyst, you're able to close games out very quickly with goats and or spellbooks. And what you're seeing on screen now is the deck list that we're going to quickly break down before we take a look at some more matches. So breaking this deck down from the top left, we have 4 Maleficent biding her time. This is your 1-drop 2-quester, your ideal 1-start, but you also have 4 Pascal in case you just need something on board to combo with a Mim Snake, but you can also use this in the end game to quest for the 1 lore you need to win the game, and it sometimes puts a lot of pressure on your opponent just dropping it early game and continuing to quest while it's protected. In the 2-drop slot, you've got your Mim Snake, your Pinocchio, and your LeFou, all of which are good turn 2 plays depending on how your turn 1 went. And then in the 3-drop slot, this is where the deck really starts to either decide, does it need to stabilize with the Mim Fox, or can you extend with card advantage into the Maleficent, or do you just put more questing pressure on board with the Arthur and or Minnie Mouse? Turn 4, which is as high as you go in terms of character drops, you've got your 4 Goat, this is your game closure, and 4 Merlin Rabbit for draw power. Combos well with Mims and the Arthur, and then you also have 4 Pongo as you saw in that match in the beginning, just more questing pressure with evasive that can help close the game up very quickly. The nice thing too is that these are inkable, and then in the 4-drop slot early on, this is a card you usually just end up inking, and you don't feel too bad about losing a critical resource like you would if you had to ink, let's say, LeFou when you had a Pinocchio on board and you wanted to ready it back up after it quested. On the action side, you've got 3 Fan the Flames and 4 Teeth and Ambitions. I've already explained kind of the interaction with Fan the Flames, but you just want more ability to ready up your characters. And then the Teeth and Ambitions is always just ink if you don't need it, but it can help you really stabilize going second against other aggro decks. And then 4 Friends on the other side, a great combo piece with either the Merlins or some of your 3-drops like Maleficent or Minnie Mouse or even the Fox. and then another game closer in the spellbook. Once you put this on board, your opponent is really on a clock because you've likely generated double-digit lore by then, thanks to the early drops that you have, and this deck is just, you know, straight up, I'm going to push through with as much lore as possible, as quickly as possible, and it's very hard to deal with. In the grind game, this deck actually has some resiliency because you do have the Madam Mim and Merlin packages to draw cards and keep your hand healthy. That's just how Amethyst goes, though. That's why it's such an overpowered color right now. And paired with the Ruby package, you can see you get a little bit more utility, in my opinion, than you do with the Amber cards. So the deck list is also linked in the description and probably pinned in the comments, but let's go ahead and take a look at some more matches now. So if you've made it this far in the video and you haven't dropped a like on it yet, please make sure you do that if you are enjoying this content. It just encourages me to continue making these kind of videos for you and releasing the secret sauce from time to time. Now in this matchup here, we are going second against a more traditional Ruby Amethyst deck, kind of like, you know, the whole tier 0 thing. They opt to Inca Minnie Mouse and pass, and what's funny is this game ended up pairing me against what I would say is like an anti-aggro deck against me for Ruby Amethyst. You're going to see why in just a second. Not only are they playing the Aladdins, which help claw back lore, which can be very critical in the endgame against aggro, but they're also playing some saucy rush characters, which you'll see in a second. But again, props to this opponent for trying out the spice. They're playing their first character on turn 3, and unfortunately we didn't get the most aggro stars, so we weren't able to take advantage of the lack of character play on the opponent's side. But this is what I was talking about in the deck list portion of the video, where I said even if you just keep that Pascal on board, questing for 2, 3, 4 lore, can end up making a difference in the endgame. I opted Teeth and Ambitions there, which may be a misplay, but I figured I wanted to keep the opponent off a turn 3 Friend Sing and then a turn 4 follow-up and just slow them down a little bit, but in the end it probably doesn't end up mattering. Speaking of friends, we're going to end up singing our own with our Maleficent and then continue to quest with the Pascal. We have to make sure we put something on board so that when the Maleficent gets outed, it is still protected. So we're going to go ahead and most likely drop this Arthur here. You could also make the case to drop a Merlin, but I think the Arthur just puts a little bit more pressure on board. The opponent reveals the sauce in the Peter Pan Shadow and all that nonsense I was talking about in the first video clip about, yeah, you got mini evasives and pongos to quest freely and they're totally protected when they're exerted. Well, not if there's a Peter Pan Shadow on the other end of the field that will also give Mim Fox and Maui rush, but also if the opponent is playing it, other rush characters like Rafiki, which is crazy, but you'll see what happens. So despite the Peter Pan Shadow, I'm still going to play out the Mini Surfer because, again, you can still fan the flames and LeFou your evasives to keep them ready. Same concept behind readying up your things like Pinocchio. Now, I was not expecting a Rafiki drop, but there you can see it's the ideal answer to my Arthur there. And they even have the Mim Fox. So they've got triple evasives on board and they're probably feeling pretty good, thinking like, yeah, I'm not afraid of your mini evasive here because I'm just simply going to out everything that you intend to do. This aggro deck isn't going to be making any headway against my Rush Ruby Amethyst. And again, amazing concept. I really, really like it and appreciate it. But thankfully off this Maleficent drop, we are able to draw into either a LeFou or a Fan the Flames. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to ready up the Pinocchio, and unless you have a Be Prepared for next turn, I'm going to be questing for a lot. Go ahead and out my Mini Surfer, it doesn't matter. And sure enough, as expected, on turn 7, which the game doesn't really get to all that often with these decks, the opponent is going to be forced to Be Prepared here. And the opponent is left on 3 cards. They've used Be Prepared, they've lost tempo, they've cleared their own board, they have 6 lore, we have more lore, we have the draw spell in the Merlin Rabbit and the friends on the other side for follow-up if we need it. And we're looking pretty good. Now the downside is, yes, the opponent has more of a top end here, they have more ink, and they establish an Ursula. You might be thinking, Quantum, that's a problem, you're not outing that Ursula, and you're absolutely right. I'm not going to be outing the Ursula. I'm going to force my opponent to out their own Ursula. And what do I mean by that? Well, I'm going to potentially go wide enough that a Maleficent Dragon and or Lady Tremaine isn't enough to deal with my board, and I'm going to force them to Be Prepared once again. So I have 3 questing pressure on board, which is going to match the Ursula for the same 3 lore that it quests for, and the more wide I go, the more threatening I get, because again, I'm already ahead in the lore, and they know, most likely, that on Amethyst, because they're playing it themselves, I probably have goats, I probably have spell books, and so just like that, I'm going to be able to establish a goat here in order to put the opponent on, yep, that's right, out my goat, I go to 17, you have to out the rest of my cards, you don't have the Peter Pan Shadow, even if you did, you can't out the Minnie Mouse yet, you have to Be Prepared, or Maleficent Dragon, and they opt to Be Prepared here. The Maleficent Dragon probably wouldn't do enough because they couldn't out my Rabbit as well without challenging into it, which would put them behind on the lore count, which would give me the extra turn, and I still have Spellbook in the back pocket Rocket to close the game out with as well. Remember that when Goat hits the field, it is essentially a guaranteed 2 lore, right? It's pending 1 lore when it leaves the field. Now in this scenario, the opponent had 1 out. They have to have 4 specific cards out of the 5 in their hand. They had to have Lady Tremaine, Mini Surfer as a 3-drop to go to out the Pinocchio and then quest for 4 next turn. And then during the next turn, when they quest for the 4 going to 17, they would need to have a Goat and a Bounce and then replay the Goat with 10 ink. So they needed those very specific cards in order to win that game. Otherwise, there was no other out that would allow them to win before I was going to be able to spellbook to close the game out. And just like that, going second, we're still able to dominate the Ruby Amethyst matchup. Now in this match here, we are going second against a very aggressive Amber Amethyst. So once again, showing you that aggro mirror, because these are important. Aggro decks usually just combat through pretty much anything. And I think I have 1 steel match where I ended up winning, and I had one where I lost. I was at 19 lore and the opponent was playing like Fire the Cannons and Strength of the Raging Fires, and I was just like, man, like if they just didn't have one of those spells, or actions, I would have won the game. But here you can see why this deck, the Ruby Amethyst version, is better than the Amber Amethyst in my opinion. They're going to be forced to befuddle their Pinocchio to protect it, and just like what I talked about in the beginning, they lose tempo from that, right? You lose card advantage, you lose tempo, but you have to protect your high questing threats. Whereas for me, I just played a LeFou. I'm able to out your card now because LeFou is a 2/2 body in the aggro matchup, and I'm able to just continue to leave my pressure on board. And in the aggro matchup, unless you want to trade your 1/1 questers into my 1/1 questers, mine are likely just surviving and going to quest again, right? And then you give up tempo to me in order for you to out my board. And so again, the LeFou is able to just put in some extra work here, take out the Maleficent, and this LeFou essentially went 2 for 1 and protected a Maleficent for 4 questing power. We're going to go ahead and now sing the friends on the other side. The opponent also missed an ink drop, by the way. That's, again, playing a lot of uninkables on the Amber Amethyst version, I guess, is what you deal with. But because we were able to now draw into that Teeth and Ambitions, once again, you can just see the domination that we have. We have 5 questing pressure on board. We've outed the entire opponent's board, and we have the 4 ink. So we are in total control. They drop an Arthur, and there's like nothing they can do. So they give me the well played early because I think they know it's over. But at this point, yeah, I can just establish a go so that I can challenge their Arthur next turn. I don't even care about this Teeth and Ambition. I'd rather drop the Maleficent and just threaten very close to, if not lethal, on board right now, which is kind of insane. So I think they just end up dumping their hand to show me that, yeah, they were on double Arthur, so kind of unfortunate, and a Maleficent here, and they're just not able to establish early enough in order to put the pressure on us because we were able to disrupt their plays quite heavily. And so they do out the Pinocchio with the Arthur, so again, just delaying the inevitable, and the other aggro decks have no answer, absolutely no answer to the Mini or the Pongo here. I'm debating, do I want to quest, do I want to challenge, and I'm like, okay, I'll just go ahead and challenge. Hard cast the Friends, and then kind of stupid to not play the Minnie Mouse here, but I guess I just opt for the Arthur and pass. It's irrelevant though. I mean, it's game no matter what. Yeah, the opponent ends up dropping a Simba, and again, you can just see it's just not enough, right, in these matchups, and why the Ruby version is just like that LeFou play in the beginning is what clutched the match for us here. So the opponent is just going to kind of show me what they were on here, not really able to do too much. Their final card in hand, I believe, is a Befuddle that they're going to be able to use on my Maleficent, which again doesn't really do much. So they give me the well played, and we just close the game out with the Goat. That's going to wrap it up for this video. If you made it this far, again, make sure you dropped a like and a comment letting me know what you think. Thank you again for watching. Quantum is out.